Hi, everybody. My name is Juan. I'm here today joined by Paul McLeod, founder and president of Bespoke Analytics. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hey, Juan, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. So today we have something special. You've been working in basically trying to define a case study for the reinsurance industry, if I'm not mistaken. So why don't you go ahead and paint a picture about the company that you work with and what were their initial challenges, if you like?
Yeah, I thought this one was interesting because it kind of covered a different aspect of work. One where there was an organization with a legacy infrastructure and data warehouse and how they tackled that to bring things into the future, set them up for the future. So this was one of the largest international insurance and reinsurance companies on the island. And they had a Microsoft SQL-based, data warehouse, two of them actually, which had been in place and operating in a key resource in the organization for about 15 years. It had been built with traditional, the SQL platform tools, SSIS, various SQL store procedures and views and all those kind of things, Visual Studio, and also some of the the visual data tools that come with SQL. The challenge you're facing is they were on an older SQL platform that was being end of life, basically. And they had a timeline where they had to migrate their environment to, an upgraded SQL platform. And that was going to pose some challenges to them because, the newer version of SQL they were going to, I think they're going from 2012 to 2019. And there was significant enough changes in the tool sets that there was going to be quite a bit of migration of the different code bases in that process. But also because the application was so heavily embedded within their operations, both serving data out to their end users for reporting and analysis, but also integrated highly into their different applications and in-house applications, that it was going to be a very challenging project to execute to kind of do that migration. It wasn't an upgrade to the server. They're having to build out new servers and then pick apart all the ETL processes and all the relationships. The source servers were being upgraded and moved to new locations as well. So there's quite a lot going on with that. And in the back of the mind of the CEO at the time was, this is a legacy warehouse. Two legacy warehouses have been there for a long time. They're operating great, been kind of serving the purpose, for the business very reliably. But, will they be fit for purpose in the next 10 years? Should we be looking at this opportunity to perhaps upgrade the technology suite so that we can make sure that we're, that we're kind of well placed to handle things like, potentially going to the cloud in 5 years time or not, or depending on how it is, and also to make the upgrading of these processes easier in the future. So that was the position they're in. That's the challenge they're looking for is, okay, we have to do this. We have to do this investment to upgrade this. But if we're doing it, is there a way we can be smart about this so we get more benefit than just migrating the warehouses to a new platform, but kind of, with a little bit of extra investment and effort, create something that's more future-proofed as a solution for the organization.
You mentioned, sorry, a couple of questions on that. So, number one, you mentioned a timeline. What was the timeline? I'm just curious, what was the urgency? And then secondly, the second question will be, was there an existing data team that were basically trying to go through that process and struggling, or did you have to kind of come in and solve all the puzzle, which is a substantial puzzle?
So the timeline, I think we had a year to do it for the official kind of end of life date for Microsoft. As it turned out, that kept getting extended. But so the initial timeline was, we got a hard deadline for a year, which was focused everybody's minds. Insofar as the data team, and this is an organization that we worked with closely for years. So we were actually the team that was supporting, their actual data warehouse implementation. So we knew the infrastructure very well. We worked kind of, in a very close partner relationship with them. So we kind of, we didn't necessarily come in to help the team. We were the team, determining the approach of how we took this forward with them, working with budgets and objectives and all this kind of stuff for the business, and making sure that we gave them, different options that made sense for them. I guess, yeah. So one thing I did want to say was, the thing that had been constantly adding pain over time was just, the complexities of these systems. We build them with a traditional tool, so you have a lot of moving parts. And one of the things that had been an ongoing challenge was the accurate, and documentation and knowledge share of the information that was in there. So that was something that had been an ongoing pain point, something you just have to live with, and you look at doing a complete documentation exercise, it's incredibly expensive. And as soon as you're finished, it's out of date. In fact, before you've finished, it's out of date because somebody's changed something that you've already documented while you're doing the documenting the rest of it. So there was, there were some existing pain points that we're trying to address in this process as well. So, how can we get a solution that's going to be easier for us to prove to audit, that it's correct, one that's going to also help us support it better as as an internal team, kind of empower them more to understand the solution, stuff like that. So those are some of the pain points and underlying objectives for what they wanted to achieve.
Perfect. So you mentioned a number of issues and pain points among the documentation, which is obviously the excruciating one. Can you tell me a little bit about how was the implementation? Obviously, you had a build relationship with the client, so that fixed things in many levels. But how was the go ahead and kind of roadmap of that implementation?
Yeah. So we did a little cost benefit analysis, and we basically gave them two approaches. We said, okay, one approach, let's look at what it's going to take for us to basically to lift and shift the solution using the same tool set, but the newer versions of everything to a new server, and stitching and taking into account also the other servers that are all going to be upgraded with all the different databases and stuff on them. And so we gave that kind of, we put a proposal together for that, timeline and cost, and then we did the same thing using an automation data warehouse tool. Basically saying, okay, if we take the existing legacy database and we bring that into an automation tool, what will that kind of look like from a cost perspective? Now, it's interesting because there was additional cost to it, because one of the things that we weren't going to be doing in the upgrade was we weren't going to be trying to pick apart business rules and reapplying business rules in a new way. We're basically migrating the basic programmatic, components that encapsulated those business rules, to a new version of the software. And obviously, if you're taking a data warehouse and you're integrating it into a different tool set, then you do have to re-engineer those business rules. But we came up with this and looked at it, and there's a tool we've been using for automation for other clients, and we said, this is really going to be a good fit here. And we basically went through it and said, we think for like maybe 25% more cost, we can bring you into, migrate this to an automated platform, which will do so many things for you, longer term, than just move it to the new SQL platform and the new servers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we put those proposals together for them, and then we had discussions about things, and then ultimately they chose to go the automation route because they could see that there was, even though it was a slightly more expensive route, they could see that there was benefit, that kind of warranted that investment.
All right. Okay. So from that point of the agreement set and with the automation tool, can you name the automation tool, or is something that you prefer?
Yeah,
to
we
keep
used TimeXtender, which is a tool that we're a local part for TimeXtender. We've used it extensively with different clients, and the reason why we recommend it is because it's lots of ways you could describe it. I think sometimes the easiest way to describe it, it's a data warehouse automation tool. So when you think about what you need to do to build a data warehouse, especially in a finance environment where you've got a lot of audit and governance around these type of solutions, they've got to be Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. They've got to be, meet all these different kind of, regulatory, kind of, bars to make sure that they're going to be fit for purpose. And the nice thing about TimeXtender, it automates a lot of those kind of processes. So things like auditing when the build took place and if it was successful or not, and recording the documentation on that. We used to have to code all that by hand. TimeXtender does all that for you, so you have to worry about it. Things like, managing version control and doing promotes between environments and putting governance and control around that, managing access and documenting the whole thing. That all just comes with a tool. So it drastically reduces the amount of effort you've got to do to build these solutions. So that's why we're proposing it to them, because this is really going to be, it's going to provide so many advantages for them going forward on many different fronts for realistically not that much more cost.
Amazing. So you chose the automation route, and let's proceed from that. So what were the next scenarios? So were there any particular challenges that you found with such a legacy technology, even though you knew it rather well? I suppose there were some surprises. What were the nuances during the process, and how did you overcome it?
So I mean, obviously the biggest challenge that we had to overcome was the fact that it was such a widely embedded data warehouse solution. They had two data warehouses that were basically feeding reporting and, as I said, in internal applications and analysis across the organization, and hundreds of reports and hundreds of integration points with the databases and stuff. And we could definitely repoint, these connections to new database servers. But the thing that was going to be challenging was that we had to make sure that it had exactly the same infrastructure. So we couldn't say rewrite, the warehouse from scratch and come up with slightly different table names. Everything had to be exactly the same, which, could potentially be challenging if you're doing something like, say, let me re-implement this data warehouse in a new tool. And we basically had two approaches. One, we literally start from scratch. We start, designing all the individual tables as they were. Maybe we get the data types wrong. There's going to be, it was 30, 40 tables, 30, 40 fields per table of different data types and stuff. They obviously all had legacy connections. Break any of that would cause a problem. The one thing that was nice, though, is that there was a reverse engineering component within the TimeXtender tool. So we were able to point it at the actual existing data warehouse and get it to reverse engineer and recreate the structure automatically within TimeXtender of what the data warehouse table structure views look like. So that right off the bat saved us a massive amount of time. So we were able to get then the exact image of the database, but in this tool. And then once you've got that structure in place, the rest of it is the ETL process to populate those tables. So how do you then start stitching in the different, source systems and populate the tables? For that, because we had a year, but we also were anticipating we'd have to have a reasonable amount of time for some sort of parallel runs. So it wasn't like we had a year until we had to go live. We were anticipating that we had to go live and have at least the 3-month window where we could run this thing in parallel with the existing system to make sure that we got it right. I mean, this thing was driving everything: finance department, the underwriting, claims, everything, integration to the parent company, everything was coming out of these data warehouses. So we had to make sure that the data was coming out right.
No room for mistakes.
Yeah. So we didn't have a year to do it. We had to do it quite aggressively. And so what we did then is we kind of took a combination approach. We said, well, let's be pragmatic about this. The first thing we need to do is let's make use of the automation tool to load the tables where it's going to be fastest. So loading all things like, okay, this is all the policy detail. This is the coverage detail. Things that don't necessarily require complex business rules. This is the list of brokers. So we use the tool's native capabilities to do that because it's fast, it's quick, it gets documented. Where we had things that were complex, like maybe some complex earnings and reinsurance participant details around sets of data points, we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in the existing code base, because that was all done through stored procedures, and we will run that from within the TimeXtender tool. So it's still doing loading the whole process, still governing and controlling the whole process, but we're not necessarily arranging that business rule right now. And we can tackle that in the future so that we can get off the existing platform, move to the new platform, have an automated environment to kind of work with that allows you to easily deploy. And then down the road, look to, later on migrate those processes to the more native TimeXtender capabilities if and when it made sense. So that approach actually worked really well. It was quite good. There were some challenges we faced. Invariably, anytime you build a kind of a solution like a data warehouse, key structures become very important. Some of the things that had been done around the keys were very kind of unique to this solution. So we did have to, come up with some clever solutions to regenerate keys. Like, so we, as an example, had preloaded every dimension field with an unknown member to handle situations where you load data in, but there's no broker on the record. What do you do with it? You can't throw it out. You need that premium. You flag it as unknown. So handling stuff like that was a little bit tricky at first, but we managed to get past that pretty easily. And the other thing that was really cool about this, as we're starting to do this, we started to, there are other capabilities that TimeXtender tool brought to the table. So we were able to do things like start adding compression to tables that were traditionally very large. And so that allowed us to kind of, reduce the impact on the disk space on their servers. We were also able to implement incremental loading capabilities because it's very easy to do within TimeXtender, and it can be very complex to do if you're coding that stuff manually. So that, that again allowed us to do things like say, okay, we can shrink the build window because we can incrementally load this stuff. We literally were loading 20 something years of history every time that the warehouse was loading. So we were able to do quite a bit to optimize that whole load process. So that kind of went really well. Other challenges, we think.
Any stakeholder management that was, and again, I know you had a relationship with them, but
yeah, no, that went well. I mean, and the good news is that, to coin an ill-used phrase, the plan was that there would be no impact on the users. So ultimately we switched the reports over to the new server and nobody knows any different kind of thing. There was one thing escaping my mind. I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point, but no, it actually went really smoothly, which was kind of exciting, and, at the end of the day, we actually managed to get the whole conversion done in 6 months, which was pretty remarkable considering these were legacy data warehouses that had been, in place for 15 plus years, that had been, extended and enhanced over time as the business became more complex, as they got into new business areas, new business rules added on top of old business rules. Well, that was the thing that was a challenge. So we got to the point then where we had everything up and running, and then we started doing a parallel run, and we wrote some automation scripts to test between the tables. We identified key tables, say, okay, we're going to go through and automatically test every single field to make sure everything's lining up. And in that process, we found some legacy errors that had existed in the old system and nobody had ever noticed. And so ooh, okay. Oh, wow. What do we do? Do we keep them? Do we put the errors back, or do we kind of go forward? Because it was, in that instance, there was going to be, in some instances, an impact to the user because we were going to be correcting data that had been wrong for ages. None of it was material. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, there's $100,000 or $100 million we missed or something like that. It was more, this thing is being categorized slightly incorrectly, but it's the wrong kind of retro reinsurance, and nobody noticed all this time, kind of stuff. So it wasn't there was no material impact, but that was the interesting thing, was to kind of say, no, the new one's not wrong, the old one is. That was a kind of interesting.
Yeah. All right. So 6 months, completely automated, future-proof data state. Would you say that that's kind of the summary of the equation? Are there any other benefits that you think have come across after that deployment?
Absolutely. So, first of all, we were able to, and the interesting thing about TimeXtender is you design the solution within the tool, and then the tool automates the design and executes the design. What that means is that it has a complete understanding of what the actual implementation is. So the documentation just comes out. You literally push a button and say, I'd like to document this data warehouse solution. And it gives you end-to-end documentation of this field in this cube over here came from this backend AS400 system, or this backend SQL database, or whatever it is, so that piece done automatically, which is fantastic. The other thing that it does automatically is the whole data loading piece is managed and automated, and you can multi-thread it. You decide how many threads you want to run it in, and the tool TimeXtender then figures out the most efficient way to load all the different tables, taking into account, where the dependencies are, because it understands the flow of data. So it says, I know I can load this stream of data separate to this other stream of data, so I will. And so from a standpoint of optimizing the kind of daily ETL processes, so easy. Rather than before, you'd be sitting there and you'd be hand coding, okay, I'll run this stored procedure first, and I'll do this one. And no, you got to do that one first, because you don't have to worry about all that. TimeXtender took care of that. So, greatly simplified the overnight processing. So you've got documentation, overnight processing. It's a single tool. So there wasn't a situation where we had, you've got to have an expert in 4 different tools, which is where we were before. And some people are better in some tools than others. It's all one tool, and it's fairly easy to use. So the ability for us to actually, start getting the client's IT team involved in the support of the environment more so than they were in the past started to become an option and availability. They can get into the simplified tools, the other pieces. You're teaching them how to use one tool, not 4 or 5. So that was a massive benefit as well. And the other piece is really future-proofing it from 2 perspectives. One, the next time they want to upgrade a server, it's a piece of cake. All you do is say, okay, well, I'm not taking the data from that server, I'm taking it from a different one, and I'm not deploying it on this server, I'm deploying it on a different one. And it's just, you're finished. It's, instead of being a 6-7 month exercise to lift and shift a data warehouse and all its tools, it's literally like about 2 or 3 minute exercise to change connections, redeploy, reprocess, and you're done. So that's massive. And the final piece as well is that deployment also allows you to do things like shift between on-premise and cloud-based infrastructure. So you can say, actually, we're at a point now as an organization, we're maturing, we've made some kind of policy decisions, we now want to be cloud-based and stop being, the kind of on-premise environment. Then again, it is just literally, let's change that deployment endpoint so that it is now deploying to Azure rather than deploying to an on-premise SQL server. So, really kind of ticked the box on so many levels. It was a great success.
Amazing. Yeah. That's wonderful. Really solid case, really solid solution, and scalability and future proof. So, ticks all the boxes. If I was a client, I will be hiring you right now, Paul. What would you say? So obviously there is.
Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I thought it was an interesting thing to highlight, because sometimes when we're talking to prospective clients, they're like, oh, well, we've already got a data warehouse. I can't see, how can we move? Because they do become these lumbering giants, and without an automation tool to be able to kind of offload the work, it's almost insurmountable. It's like a Sisyphean task. It's almost insurmountable to say, how on earth do I move this to another platform or to a different tool set? It can hurt your brain to say, okay, I'll replace that tool set with this one and this one with that one and this one and that one, and how do we stitch them together? And it's like all those things, all those concerns go out the window. It was a pretty just professionally, it was just such a satisfying experience to actually to execute it and have it come out so well. It was nice. Yeah,
that was partially my question to you. So what would you say to those organizations that are thinking about updating their data warehouse, and probably the process is daunting to them? What would you recommend them to do other than obviously speak to?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, probably depending on where you are, and if you're looking at legacy infrastructure, you're going to have to be making the decision around things like, am I going to stay on premise? Am I going to go to the cloud? Does my technology suite make sense to you? I mean, start looking at things like Microsoft Fabric and all the kind of capabilities that you've got with the AI machine learning tools that come bundled with those type of technologies. If you're sitting in, with your legacy on-premise warehouse, you're like, how do I move away from this without throwing away all the business rules or engaging in this 10-year exercise to re-engineer this warehouse from scratch? It can almost seem like an impossible task, but the exciting thing is it doesn't have to be. It can actually be pretty straightforward. if you because just the way that TimeXtender allows you to focus on really all I really care about is the business solution, all the plumbing piece and all the audit stuff and all the kind of, some of the, the fiddly bits under the covers, they're taken care of. I really just have to focus on, okay, what's the data sets that need provided and what are the business roles that need to drive those data sets, and let's implement that. Everything else is kind of taken care of, which is pretty amazing.
Fantastic. So I suppose we're going to close the webinar now. Thank you. I'm going to ask you the last question that I always ask you. What's your call to action for your prospective customers?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So if you're sitting there and you've got a legacy data warehouse and you're trying to do some planning for the future as to what you're going to do with that, give us a call. We can probably help you look at it in a slightly different way and maybe give you an option you hadn't considered was even possible about how you can automate the data warehouse build, your data warehouse build, and position your organization to really future-proof the next iteration of that solution. How's that?
Amazing. With that said, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you reach out to Paul if there is a need, and thank you for engaging and listening to us. Have a good day.
Thank you, Juan. Take care.